Welcome to Sector Report. I'm David Beatson. This week, what's got vets worried about the future of antibiotic use in agriculture? Is New Zealand's smart green economy all talk and no action? And how are cattle farmers taking to the new NAIT regime for animal identification and tracing?
If we look at the profit per hectare and we look at the productivity gains that could be achieved just by getting to best practice, that's a $500 million prize for the top 50% of farmers.
Well, NAIT is all go at last. This month it's mandatory for all cattle to be covered by the National Animal Identification and Tracing System. Some 30,000 farmers have had their herds registered with NAIT on opening day, and that means coverage is far from complete. Our rural correspondent Drew Chappell has been running a check.
That's them. The one with the round edge, they go to the bottom. They're going to go to the front of the ear. I like to put them in the right ear. Like in future, these tags won't be here, you know, so we won't. But it goes right in the middle of the ear.
It's just like getting your ears pierced, only on a bigger scale. This is what NAIT looks like to a 2-year-old beef bull. A painful and thankfully brief ordeal getting tagged with a new radio frequency ID device, or RFID. These guys are the unlucky few that have to go through this process twice in one lifetime.
We'll never have to do this again because they'll be done as weaners. Yeah. Like everything that'll come onto this farm will be tagged, so we'll never have to go through this process again. It's just complying now, just like you should be never tagging big heavy animals like this.
Laurie and Joy Shearer finish around 300 beef bulls a year on their 130 hectare Te Puke property. Since they buy all their weaners from the same supplier, the shearers haven't had any issues complying with NAIT.
It just shows you how these people have adapted to NAIT. We've bought the same animals from the same owner for the last 2 years and they've already had the tags in, so these good farmers adapt pretty sharply, you know, like they've been tagging them for 2 years.
The process is simple enough, but for those with larger cattle to tag, like the shearers, there is an added element of danger.
A lot of people won't sort of tag animals like this that are going off to the works. If they haven't got the facilities, they'll get hurt, you know. They'll try doing them in a raceway and it's just too hard to go.
Yeah.
You know, like there's a bit of a penalty, but it's easy to take a bit of a penalty with big animals like than get hurt.
Especially when dealing with animals like these, exotic breeds, bigger and moodier.
A lot of people just try jam them in the race and do it from the top of the race. That's fine, but it's pretty risky too. Like with these big animals, especially exotics, they get worked up, and as you can see, you know, they want to jump over and things like that. These animals don't come to the yards very often, especially on these big stations. Like they don't like being here.
When it comes to buying or selling cattle, the NAIT system is supposed to keep things relatively simple. Once tagged, an animal is tagged for life, no matter who owns it.
If we buy stock from the registered sale yards, they've recorded and that's passed on. If we buy stock in the paddock, our agent has a reader, he reads them and puts that information to NAIT. So we don't actually have to do anything. And when we kill, these animals go straight to the works and that information's then passed on. So we don't have to actually outlay readers or anything like that just to be compliant.
Here in Rangiuru, at the yard's first sale since the start of NAIT, almost every animal we saw had a tag.
Righto, 515 kilos. There's a good scalp for you guys. Let's go. That is the money.
PGG Rights and Livestock Manager Nigel Thorpe says all around the country, most farmers know what is required of them under the new rules.
You'll find all bar small lifestylers, they generally have a head bale or a race to tag their cattle. But look, if they come in here and they've got no tag, depending on the sale yards make their choice, and we'll tag them here for a fee. That fee is not kept, it's kept by the sale yards, and it's a standard fee across the country of $25 a head. And or we take the liberty to send them home. So, look, ideally they need to be compliant. They need to have the tag in before they come in.
Towards the end of June, there were some big numbers going through the yards in anticipation of the NAIT program affecting prices. Nigel Thorpe says while this has had an impact on the market, NAIT has been far less disruptive than perhaps some thought.
Yesterday and today we've seen some relatively small yardings of cattle around the country, but however that's just on the back of people just waiting and seeing how the process goes. But to be fair, because of the minimal amount of cattle that have been around this week, the market's actually firmed on last week, where we saw great numbers come through pre-NAIT. So all in all, look, give it a week or two to settle down. We'll be back into the new normal flow.
And at a national level, NAIT has passed many by without too much fuss. It's easy to forget now, but initially NAIT was described by some as both an unnecessary cost and a logistical burden. Federated Farmers President Bruce Wills, a red meat farmer himself, says the scheme was well signalled and has been well supported by Feds members, despite initial scepticism.
The farming community is in some sectors a little bit grumpy with NAIT, but hey, certainly Federated Farmers' view is we've accepted it. It's now policy. Let's move on and make sure that policy works in an efficient and easy way for the farming community to get used to a whole new scheme.
And for industry good organisation Beef and Lamb New Zealand, NAIT has been another way to encourage beef farmers to improve their bottom lines.
If we look at the profit per hectare and we look at the productivity gains that could be achieved just by getting to best practice, that's a $500 million prize for the top 50% of farmers.
For those who go face to face with these animals every day, the red tape side of the transition has been pretty smooth.
There's been that much advertising in the paper and these local farming magazines. It's been fine, yeah. It's just some people dig their toes in and don't want to change, but you always find that. But like I say, the good farmers have just taken it on board and moved on.
So if the country's farmers start to see some benefits of the NAIT system coming back in farm gate returns, the few moments of pain for these cattle will all be worth it.
Drew Chappell reporting. And next, why are our vets worrying about their ability to use antibiotics? For the answer, stay with Sector Rep. Could we see treatments for common human ailments being rendered useless because of antibiotics being overused in agriculture? Overseas, there's increasing evidence of links between antibiotic use in animals and disease resistance to the use of the same antibiotics in human medicine. It's a worrying trend, and it was on the agenda for discussion at the New Zealand Veterinary Association's annual conference recently. Dr. Dennis Scott, Technical Director for the Auckland veterinary marketing company Ethical Agents, was there. Dennis, thanks for joining us. Tell me, by world standards, are we heavy users of antibiotics in agriculture here?
Certainly not by world standards. We do use antibiotics to treat animals in two ways: prophylactically, which means to try and prevent disease, and two is therapeutically to treat disease. But with our extensive pastoral farming system, we have little need for the antibiotics compared to, say, the intensive feedlot systems that they use in overseas.
Well, quite clearly we're seeing horticulture using antibiotics at the moment, and so there's obviously applications there as well that you'd have to be concerned about.
Yeah, I think there's applications in the horticulture. The big concern was with the kiwi fruit, which I'd call misuse of antibiotics rather. There's use and misuse. Yeah.
Why do you say that?
I think, well, the fact that they injected them into the vines.
Oh, I see that which was not the recommended, was not the
No,
not the proper practice.
Certainly not proper practice. Animals can metabolise antibiotics. When you inject them into animals and then they metabolise them and they eliminate them, so that when our food, our meat goes to market, there's absolutely no trace of antibiotics in that meat. It's tested thoroughly. Whereas you put it into a vine or a tree, they've got no metabolic system like animals have, so they can't eliminate them to the same degree, so nobody knows how long they persist. The big risk is not so much the antibiotics themselves. Antibiotics are in general are very safe compounds. And if it wasn't for antibiotics, we'd all been dead in our 30s like they used to be. But the big thing about antibiotics is that bacteria exposed to antibiotics breed resistant strains. And what the then problem is that if you have it continually in your food and you're developing resistant strains and spreading them, so that you get disease with strains of bacteria where the antibiotics won't work.
Is there a lot of crossover between the antibiotics that are being used in agriculture and the antibiotics which are being used for human medicine?
No, not really. We do have 2 or 3 of what we call antibiotics of high interest to human medicine, which we use for specialised indications, specialised cases.
They are?
They are fluoroquinolones, third and fourth generation cephalosporins, which basically are classes of antibiotics, and they do have special needs. They are extremely useful antibiotics, but they're very, very tightly regulated in the industry, and their use is minimal. Their major use is mainly penicillins and other antibiotics, which aren't of great concern to human health.
Is there evidence of human resistance to particular antibiotics showing up in New Zealand?
Yeah, I believe there is, but I don't believe the risk comes from the veterinary industry. The main risk is really people travelling overseas, going to countries like Mexico and eating chicken and getting what we call Campylobacter, which is a disease which there's a high resistance to in Mexico, flying back on the plane and bringing it back here, or in hospital situations. The biggest risk of antibiotics resistance is high concentrations in hospitals.
In one of your papers, you actually refer to a horrific situation in India. I couldn't believe it.
Exactly. The problem in India, and it was found by Swedish researchers last year, is that there's a lot of resistance in the human population in the little villages where they've never had an antibiotic given to them in their lives. But the wells in the villages are contaminated by antibiotics because most of the world's antibiotics are produced in India, and the effluent is going straight into the rivers. Their environmental control is horrendous.
And tell me, are the human disease problems being created by that?
Not at this stage that we know of, but the potential is there.
Because that's a huge degree of exposure those people will be having.
Exactly, and of course there's a lot of disease in India in the poorer areas. So if they're resistant already to the antibiotic, we really can't treat them.
You've said that the practice that we use here is professional, and you're not concerned about that. But looking to the future, can you see the development or developments in the use of antibiotics in agriculture or horticulture that would give you cause for concern about the potential for a problem?
Well, I'm not concerned about the veterinary use per se as it is at the moment, because I think the veterinary industry does a very, very good job of regulating antibiotics.
Well, that may be so in terms of agriculture. But what about the home pet vet? The companion animals.
Oh, there is a risk there, of course, is because we think of antibiotics as just in food as the only risk, but the other risk is the close contact between the pet and the owner, so that licking the faces, drinking out of the toilet, those sort of things, so there's a great chance of intermingling bacteria between the pet and the human and transferring resistant antibiotic. But I don't think that's a major issue either. I think our major risk really is the farming conglomerates. If they get enough political power, they demand cheaper and easier access to antibiotics, and that's our biggest risk for our lawmakers. And we've seen in the kiwi fruit industry just how irresponsible some farming sectors can be. So my message really is that antibiotics are under the control of the rural veterinary practitioner. That's the best place to keep them.
You've been actively warning your colleagues about the situation that could be developing as you see it. What is it that's prompted you to do that?
It's not so much actively warning as...
Well, it sounded pretty active to me.
It's active, but what I'm really saying, it's a bit like the halfback behind a rolling maul in rugby, you know, when it's driving forward. Keep up the good work, fellas. You're going great. Keep it up. It's what I'm really saying to the rural practitioner is you're doing a very, very good job, but don't relax your standards. Just keep going.
Do you see a need for either practice change or regulatory change to avoid a problem?
Well, practice change at the moment I think is very, very good, so I don't think so. Regulatory change, we've got a very robust regulatory system. So the antibiotics that we...
Didn't stop that problem in kiwi fruit, did it?
I know, that's the robust regulatory system, because the antibiotics in the veterinary world are under veterinary control. So that's the way to do it. And the regulatory system, like the antibiotics we do have of concern, have got robust controls on them. They must not be used to treat groups of animals without sensitivity testing, the whole 9 yards. I think our system, our regulatory system, is fine. The next step really is banning certain antibiotics, but that causes its own problems, because then we come into animal welfare issues, because already we have farm groups in the South Island, for example, or meatworks in the South Island going for antibiotic-free meat. And if a farmer uses one injection of antibiotic on one of his lambs for foot rot, then he's not allowed to send his meat to the meatworks as antibiotic free. So we're looking at an animal welfare problem, which to me is a far bigger issue.
Dennis, given the fact that we live in a country which has pretty open agricultural trade now, can we in the end really insulate ourselves from the kind of problems that are giving you concern?
We can't insulate ourselves from antibiotic resistance worldwide, but the problem is not, the issue is not food. The food that we send to market ourselves is rigorously controlled and rigorously tested, and also the food that comes into the country. Try and get a banana through customs. Our biosecurity is very, very good.
Or a fruit fly.
Or a fruit fly. But the biggest risk really is people travelling overseas, picking up in either hospitals or going to Mexico, where you can buy antibiotics over the counter in drugstores and things like that, and coming back, bringing resistant bacteria back with them. You can't stop people movement, and that's the biggest risk. Our agricultural and our food issues are very, very well controlled.
Dr. Scott, thank you.
Thank you very much, David.
Dr. Dennis Scott, Technical Director for Ethical Agents. Next, where is our smart green economy? Welcome back to Sector Report. Well, there's a lot of talk about New Zealand developing a new smart green economy, but is it all talk and no action? The results of the first survey to find the top 50 green businesses in the country have just come out from the work of the Auckland market research firm New River. And New River Director Roger Parker is here to review the results. Welcome, Roger. Well, everyone's talking smart green economy, but how do you define it in the first place? Presumably you had to put a fence around it to find the top 50.
Yeah, what we did was interview senior managers in each of the sectors of the economy, and we asked them about which companies in your sector are improving the environment, and then delved into how they do that. And what we found was, in most sectors of the economy, there are companies improving the environment. And they fall into two groups. One is where they've got a product, service or technology to improve the environment, like, say, solar. And another group is where they are reducing their environmental footprint. This is, say, like a company like Fonterra, Fulton Hogan, Air New Zealand. And the green economy is really the culmination of those two groups. One earns revenue. Those were the product, service or technology to improve the environment, and the other usually about cost reduction, reputation or compliance.
What sort of scale is it? Is it big?
Yeah, in the Green 50 we've listed the top 50 of those type of companies trying to make a business out of it, and it's $1.1 billion, and that's about the size of the fishing or wine industries, and it's also growing at 15 times the speed of the national economy. It's a high growth area at the moment.
Well, tell me, are these mainly newcomers, or are they established businesses that have decided, right, here's an opportunity, we're going green?
It's there are two answers to that.
How long?
42% of the companies have started since 2003. But if you look at the leading ones, a very peak group, they've been around a bit longer. Companies like Stonewood Homes, who are a green building company, they've been around since the mid-80s, but they've really gone into green building from 2004. So, I guess it helps to have a bit more business experience.
How many of these businesses that you looked at would be focusing on agribusiness as their market?
Well, that was the surprising feature of this work overseas. When they talk about the green economy, it's always about energy, renewable energy and so on. In New Zealand, we found 11 of the top 50 companies were in the agricultural sector. They've actually got more companies improving the environment in agriculture than in the top group than any other area. So it's a strength here in agriculture.
Well, that sounds like there's a pretty strong domestic focus, but
Yep.
is there an export focus as well?
Overall, 71% of the green firms are exporting versus 18% for the general economy. So there's a lot of global demand for things that will improve the environment, and some of the agricultural ones are doing really well. Like one example is a company called Baker No Tillage. They've invented this system where instead of tilling soil, you actually drill holes to plant the seed and fertilise. That reduces carbon emission, and it actually has big increases in agricultural productivity. And that's been taken up in 17 countries. And there's a few others like that have pioneered things that are best in the world and being taken up around the world.
Well, you've just identified one for me, but is there much focus among these companies on probably what I would see as one of the major issues for the farm sector, which is greenhouse gas emission?
The main area of environmental improvement is on the runoff and effluent issues. And when we put the project together, I talked to a top environmental expert. He said those issues are actually the bigger environmental problem in agriculture. The greenhouse gas emissions, there are a few there that are doing work there, but not as many. And
it's the biological emissions that we're talking about. It's the animals. It's the normal things that animals do, but just happen to also produce some gases.
Personally, I just don't get that. Why that's a big greenhouse gas emissions issue. There's animals all over the world. People will have emissions if you look at that. So that particular environmental issue around agriculture, I personally don't get it.
Yeah, but unfortunately, there's a very large chunk of the world that does, it seems, or a growing conscious chunk of the world that does.
Yep.
So I'm wondering whether that's an area which might be in the too hard basket for the industry at this stage.
Yeah, there's a few, but I think it is. That's a developmental area that hasn't got traction yet, and I think farmers have got to be convinced before they start buying these things. That the reason why there's so many of these agricultural companies doing well is because farmers are leading this, they're buying it. And if farmers aren't convinced on the greenhouse gas emissions issue, they're not going to buy technologies and products around that. So until they buy it, those developments.
It sounds like a real chicken and egg situation.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you, in doing your ground work, did you identify any potential global winners in this sector for us?
Yeah, we did. There's some that are doing really well globally already. So there's ones like Precision Irrigation, who've come up with new irrigation technologies. Another one called Hot Rot Organics, who are doing really well around the world. The one I mentioned before, that Baker No Tillage, they're in 17 countries, and there's about 4 others that I think have got international potential, but aren't quite there yet. So yeah.
How long did it take you to get the first global top green 50, and how long is it going to be before we get the next set of ratings, the next hit parade?
Well, I've actually had the idea on my to-do list for about 8 years, and whenever I've talked to anyone about it before, they gradually come around over the years to actually we should be doing this. So, you know, I've been able to produce it this year, and the Herald run it. In terms of next year, I'm not too sure. My company's only a small research company, and I've funded this myself. It really depends if other companies commercially support it, then we can keep running it.
Gee, I hear a small commercial coming on. Give me your money and there'll be another green top 50.
Well, you know, my company can only fund so much. So.
Well, thank you for doing what you have.
Great. Thanks very much for having me, David.
Roger Parker, the director of New River, the company that's just named New Zealand's first top 50 green businesses. And that's it for Sector Report. Remember, you can check out our programs anytime online at country99tv.co.nz. Thanks for your company. I'm David Beatson for Sector Report. See you next time.